People like to believe that doing the right thing leads somewhere good. That morality is a path. That honesty is rewarded. That sacrifice is noticed. I believed that too. Until the day I made the right choice, and watched my entire life quietly collapse because of it. This isn't a story about crime or heroism. No sirens. No headlines. Just a moment where I could have stayed silent, protected myself, and kept everything I had. And instead, I spoke. 10 seconds into this confession, here's what you need to understand: I didn't lose my life because I was weak. I lost it because I refused to lie one last time. Before that moment, my life was ordinary in the best possible way. Predictable. Stable. I was trusted. Relied on. Considered solid. The kind of person others leaned on when things got complicated. I built my identity around that image. Being reliable felt like purpose. I didn't chase big dreams. I didn't rebel. I chose the path that minimized damage, to others, to myself. I believed that if I stayed careful long enough, life would eventually reward me with peace. Instead, it handed me a choice that destroyed that illusion completely. It started with information I wasn't supposed to have. Nothing dramatic. Just a detail. A small inconsistency that didn't make sense. The kind most people ignore because noticing it would require action, and action would have consequences. I told myself it wasn't my responsibility. I told myself I might be wrong. I told myself silence was a form of kindness. But once you see something clearly, pretending not to becomes a lie you have to live with every day. I watched people I cared about benefit from that silence. Careers advancing. Reputations intact. Futures secure. All balanced on something fragile and unspoken. And I realized something uncomfortable. If I stayed quiet, my life would continue exactly as planned. If I spoke, it wouldn't. The weight of that choice didn't hit me immediately. It crept in slowly, poisoning ordinary moments. Conversations felt hollow. Laughter felt borrowed. Every plan for the future felt conditional, as long as you keep pretending. At night, I replayed the scenario endlessly. Different outcomes. Different versions of myself. The one who stayed quiet and slept well. The one who spoke and lost everything. I hated the second version. Not because it was wrong. Because it was lonely. Morality isolates you when it costs too much. The day I finally spoke, nothing dramatic happened. No confrontation. No raised voices. Just a calm, devastating shift. A line crossed that could not be uncrossed. I told the truth to the person who needed to hear it most. And the silence that followed was louder than any accusation. From that moment on, things changed in subtle, irreversible ways. Trust evaporated. Conversations shortened. Invitations stopped. People didn't argue with me, they adjusted. That's how you know you've crossed a line. No one tries to convince you anymore. They just move on without you. I watched my place in the world shrink quietly. My role became unclear. My presence optional. The same people who once praised my integrity now avoided my gaze. No one said I was wrong. That was the cruelest part. They just acted like I no longer fit. I started questioning everything. Not the decision, but the meaning of it. Was morality supposed to feel this empty? Was this really what choosing right looked like? Or had I just destroyed my life for an abstract idea no one else cared about? That doubt ate at me slowly. Because regret doesn't always come from bad choices. Sometimes it comes from good ones that cost more than you were prepared to pay. By the time I realized what I had lost, it was already gone. The life built on trust, routine, and belonging couldn't survive the truth I had introduced. I had become a reminder, and people don't like reminders. I stood alone in a life that no longer recognized me, asking a question no one prepares you for. What if doing the right thing doesn't save you? What if it just reveals who you are, and takes everything else away? And that was only the beginning. Losing your life doesn't always look like loss. Sometimes it looks like emptiness. No dramatic confrontations followed. No one told me to leave. No doors slammed. No messages saying we don't want you here anymore. That would have been easier. Conflict gives shape to pain. Instead, people simply adjusted. I was no longer included in decisions I once helped make. Conversations shifted when I entered the room. My opinion stopped being asked for. My presence became something people tolerated politely, not something they relied on. That kind of exclusion is almost invisible. Which makes you question yourself. I kept wondering if I was imagining it. If I was being sensitive. If this was just paranoia born from stress. But patterns don't lie. Silence doesn't argue. It just confirms. I tried to hold on to routine, hoping normality would return if I acted unchanged. Same schedule. Same tone. Same effort. I overperformed politeness. I became careful with words, as if precision could reverse time. It didn't. I realized something then that still makes my stomach tighten. Integrity doesn't make you admired. It makes you inconvenient. I had disrupted something fragile but profitable. Something everyone benefited from by not questioning. By telling the truth, I hadn't exposed a villain, I had exposed a system. And systems don't retaliate loudly. They isolate. People stopped trusting me not because I lied, but because I proved I wouldn't. That made me dangerous. The irony was unbearable. I had built my entire identity around being reliable, ethical, solid. And the moment those traits stopped being useful, they became liabilities. At night, the doubts grew louder. I replayed the decision obsessively. Not to undo it, but to understand it. I asked myself if I had been naive. If morality was just a luxury belief for people who could afford the consequences. I asked myself if silence would have really been that bad. That's the moment where things got dark. Because once you start bargaining with your values, you don't do it out of wisdom. You do it out of pain. I felt resentment creeping in. Toward the people who distanced themselves. Toward the world that rewarded compromise more than truth. Toward myself for expecting fairness where none was promised. I started withdrawing. Not dramatically, quietly. Declining invitations. Leaving early. Speaking less. I told myself I was protecting my dignity. In reality, I was disappearing. Days blended together. Without external validation, I had no reference point for who I was anymore. My role had been stripped away, and nothing replaced it. I wasn't a whistleblower. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't even openly condemned. I was just unnecessary. There's a particular kind of despair that comes from doing the right thing and feeling stupid for it. Not righteous. Not proud. Just exposed. I began questioning my worth outside of usefulness. Outside of approval. Outside of being the good one. And I realized how fragile my sense of self had been. It was built entirely on being needed. Once that need disappeared, so did I. I considered reaching out. Apologizing. Softening the truth. Reframing it so everyone could move on. The thought tempted me more than I want to admit. Because regret doesn't ask if you were right. It asks if you can live with the cost. I stood at another moral edge, quieter than the first but just as dangerous. I could reclaim my place by minimizing what I had said. Or I could accept that some truths permanently exile you. The loneliness was profound. Not because I was alone, but because I was unseen in a way that felt deliberate. Like a collective decision had been made without my input. I stopped recognizing my own life. The future I had planned no longer existed. The present felt thin and unstable. And the past now looked like a different lifetime altogether. For the first time, I understood how people end up hollow. Not from loss alone. From meaning collapsing. I wasn't suffering because I had no values. I was suffering because I had chosen them, and didn't know how to live afterward. That's when I hit the lowest point. Not a breakdown. Not tears. Just a quiet thought that scared me more than despair ever had. Maybe this was a mistake. And the fact that I could think that, after everything, terrified me. Because if even doing the right thing can lead here, what was left to believe in? I wish I could say that everything made sense in the end. That there was a moment of clarity where the pain transformed into pride, where the loss felt justified, where someone finally said, "You did the right thing." That moment never came. What came instead was something quieter, and harder to accept. Time. Not healing. Not forgiveness. Just distance. With distance, the noise faded. The resentment softened. The urge to justify myself disappeared. I stopped replaying conversations that would never change. I stopped waiting for recognition that wasn't coming. And slowly, something unexpected happened. I started noticing who was still there. Not many people. But the ones who remained didn't need explanations. They didn't need me to defend my decision or frame it as noble. They didn't even agree with me completely. They just accepted that I had chosen something costly, and lived with it. For the first time since everything collapsed, I wasn't being measured by usefulness or convenience. I was just present. I realized then how much of my previous life had been transactional. I had been valued because I fit neatly into a structure that worked. Once I disrupted it, the value vanished. And that wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. I had mistaken belonging for alignment. Belonging asks you to stay the same. Alignment asks you to be honest. You rarely get both. I stopped trying to rebuild my old life. That version of me had depended on silence to survive. Instead, I began constructing something smaller, less impressive, but more truthful. I chose work that didn't require me to compromise my voice. Relationships that didn't depend on me being agreeable. Days that didn't feel like rehearsals for someone else's expectations. I wasn't happier. But I was real. And that mattered more than I expected. I learned that regret isn't a verdict. It's information. It tells you what you value, not what you should undo. The pain I carried wasn't proof I had chosen wrong. It was proof that the choice had weight. Easy choices don't haunt you. Only the ones that ask you to trade comfort for integrity. I still miss what I lost. Anyone who says otherwise is lying to themselves. There are moments when I imagine the life I could have kept, the security, the ease, the familiar rhythm. That life would have been quieter. But it would have required me to live with a lie. And I know myself well enough now to know where that road ends. You don't break all at once. You thin out. You fade. You become a version of yourself that survives but doesn't stand for anything. I didn't choose to be admired. I didn't choose to be remembered fondly. I chose to be able to look at myself without flinching. That choice didn't save my life. It cost it. But it gave me something I had never had before. Ownership. If you're listening to this and standing in a similar place, knowing that silence would protect you, knowing that truth would cost you, I won't tell you what to do. I can only tell you this. Whatever you choose, you will pay. The only question is whether you pay with your comfort, or with your conscience. I paid with everything else. And for the first time, that feels like enough.